Greetings, ladies and gentlemen. Thanks for joining me. This evening, I'm going to talk to another very esteemed acquaintance of mine. His name's Adam Millsap. This is definitely one of those guys whose homework assignments you wanted to copy in school if you could get away with it, believe me. Adam is a research fellow for the State and Local Policy Project at the Mercator Center at George Mason University. He has a PhD in economics from Clemson University. This evening, I'm going to see if I can draw some knowledge out of him about the whole issue of free trade, especially its intersection with politics. So, Adam, first of all, thanks again for joining me tonight.
And thanks for having me.
Absolutely. Donald Trump in the Republican Party and Bernie Sanders in the Democratic column. They seem to actually kind of agree that free trade has not only not been all it's cracked up to be, but that it's actually been a bad thing for Americans, especially American workers. So do you think you could tell us in a nutshell if they're wrong, and if so, why?
I think in the long run, they're wrong. I think when you're talking about does it make Americans better off in the aggregate, I think that's absolutely true. Free trade does. I think the data plays that out. Just, the last 70 or 80 years or so, once tariffs started coming down after World War II and things like that, we've seen, immense increases in living standards in many countries. And I think free trade has a lot to do with that. And I think the data and the economic research bears that out. Yeah, I would say in the short run, they're wrong.
Is there any run in which they might be right?
I think one thing that maybe some of the free trade proponents haven't done a great job with is recognizing the distributional problems that arise from free trade. And by that, I mean, immediately, the minute, trade starts occurring for one product. So the minute, China, for example, maybe starts making tires, and they can do it at a lower cost, they have a comparative advantage in making tires, and some tire factories shut down. At that point, it's bad for some Americans. Those people that used to work in those tire factories, it's not good for them. And sometimes we don't really do a good job of empathizing with that, I think.
One thing that's always sort of piqued my curiosity when it comes to the issue of outsourcing is whether the free trade treaties that are coming under fire right now are really to blame for it or exclusively to blame for it. It seems to me that one of the reasons why deindustrialization has set in advanced countries like the United States since the 1970s or so is that around that time, computer technology in particular began becoming really advanced. And so it made capital more mobile. It made it easier for corporate executives to shut down a plant in Michigan and open one up in Mexico more easily than they could have done maybe 100 years ago. And what that suggests to me is that even if there hadn't been this burst and flurry of international trade treaties since the 1980s or so, I suspect that a lot of the shipping of American jobs overseas that we've seen might have happened anyway. Am I right about that? Am I onto something?
I definitely agree with you that there has been, a big burst in technological capabilities. So natural resources don't matter nearly as much as they used to for many of the products we consume. We're more of especially in this country, we're more of a service economy than we are, like you said, an industrial economy. In that case, you don't really need to locate next to the river for the good shipping anymore. You don't need to locate next to the coal mine in order to get your energy, or have your water wheel next to the river and your port on the ocean and things like that. We don't really need that kind of stuff anymore. The service economy, those any kind of industries and firms can locate pretty much anywhere they want. And so they're going to look at other dimensions of location choice when they're making their decisions now. A lot of it being near a high-skilled workforce potentially, or something maybe perhaps near a government in order to do lobbying and that sort of thing in order to get favorable regulations or to make sure that unfavorable regulations aren't turned against you by your competitors. In that sense, I think there's definitely a change in how firms decide where they want to locate. But in the sense of like automation, like you said, automation and capital are kind of complements. They're complements for labor. And so one guy with a bulldozer can do a lot more than, 10 guys with shovels. So it's not so much that it's a substitute. Like sometimes I think many people think, oh, the capital displaces the workers because they're substitutes for each other. But really, it's just that they're complements. The capital makes the workers more productive. And therefore, then you just need less of them. So it's kind of better to think about it like that, I think, than think about them as substitutes for each other. But there definitely is something to the fact that we probably would see a lot less employment in certain industries separate from whether trade was liberalized as much as it was regardless, assuming though that those technological advances weren't dependent on trade liberalization, right? A lot of exchange of ideas, the technology gains we've seen, those could be, part of those can be caused by some of that trade liberalization as well, the spreading of ideas and things like that.
Do you think that there's any flaw in a lot of the international trade treaties that we've seen? For example, NAFTA keeps coming under fire in both parties, even from Hillary Clinton. So do you think there's any flaw in those treaties? Has like the scourge of crony capitalism infected, international trade treaties as well as domestic economic policy?
I mean, it's hard to tell. I don't read the trade agreements, every word that's going into them. So I'm sure there's some favorable deals carved in there for certain industries and things like that. That wouldn't surprise me. It's really important to say when we see these free trade agreements, and I think a lot of other economists point this out too. It's not always clear that we're talking about free trade in the economics in the way the economists describe it all the time, with like no tariffs, no quotas, no rules or regulations around it. Let every country decide. Let every person within a country decide who they want to consume goods from, who they want to engage in trade with. Usually there's various restrictions and environmental standards and other things that have to be met in order to have these agreements and stuff. So it's not, unilateral free trade on our end, which I think a lot of free market type economists, myself included, would be okay with. Usually there's other restrictions and stuff involved in there. So it wouldn't surprise me at all if there is some crony capitalism going on in, say, the TPP deal or maybe even the NAFTA deal. But I think still on net, even with those caveats, that the deals we've had so far have turned out, the NAFTA deal for sure has turned out to be a net benefit for Americans. And my understanding of the research that looks at the TPP deal is that it will also be a net benefit.
One thing that I've seen come up in conversations I've had with acquaintances of mine who are skeptical of free trade is that in theory, free trade should make cheaper goods and services available to consumers in wealthy countries. But very often, folks don't really feel that they're seeing the cost of living going down or rising more slowly as a result of these trade deals. Are there other factors in the economy that might simply be obscuring the effect of free trade, or what?
Well, I think for people our age, we've always kind of lived in a world of free trade. So we probably don't see what it would be like without it, right? So, I was born in 1983. So by my coming of age was under NAFTA and under trade liberalization for the most part. So it's hard for me to go back in time and say, what was it like in the 30s and 40s? And for a lot of young people, I'm sure that's the case. And really, we had a lot of free trade prior to World War I. It's after World War I and between the two world wars where the trade really got clamped down. So unless you lived in the 20s and 30s and 40s, you probably wouldn't have really been able to make a comparison then to what the world was like after. I think maybe that's where most of us find ourselves. I mean, the cost savings, it's hard to say how much would a Sony TV cost if we tried to build it in this country versus, what it costs when it's built wherever it's built. I don't know. It's hard to like make that counterfactual. But consumer electronics did get a lot cheaper, especially during the 80s and stuff like that when Japan really started to keep competing with us. They got a lot cheaper and they got a lot better. Cars, for sure, took that route. I mean, talk to anybody who had a car in the late 70s and early 80s about what their experience was like. And I'm sure they'll tell you that, the quality of the automobiles got a lot better after we started trading and competing with Japan.
Good examples. One thing I wonder is these politicians are all talking about how they're going to put an end to outsourcing. Donald Trump's talking about starting what I suspect will just turn into a trade war or a tariff war between the US and China. Even Hillary Clinton is talking about clawing back the benefits of subsidies and tax breaks from corporations that ship jobs overseas. Do you think any of these policies, or any other policies for that matter, can prevent companies from shipping jobs overseas?
In this world, I don't know, because it's so easy to, you see firms already trying to get different tax treatment. They just reorganize in a different place. I think even if America could put up a lot of barriers to trade and made it really hard to export, you would probably see some companies changing locations because it just doesn't make any sense to America. The thing about America is we're the largest economy in the world. That's absolutely true. But we're only 300 million people, and the other economies are getting richer all the time. 50 years ago, America could sit back and say, hey, if you want to do business in America, we write the rules and you got to follow them. But it's not clear that's the case anymore. So I think any kind of, building up walls and, either figuratively or literally in order to stop trade, I'm not sure it would have that much of effect. I think a lot of companies would say, we don't really need the American market. We'll go somewhere else as wealth increases around the world.
That makes sense to me. It seems that the US has somewhat less ability to just call all of the shots. What sort of empirical, real-world case do you think we can make as believers in free trade to ordinary people, especially those who have seen their jobs shipped overseas? How can we convince them that free trade is a net benefit, not only for the whole society, but it'll benefit them in the long run as well?
That's a hard case to make. I was actually talking about this today with a colleague of mine, and it's not clear to me what logical argument you use. I mean, if you're working for a tire factory, and we open up free trade with China on tires, and your factory goes out of business in say a year or something like that. I don't know what kind of argument you're going to make to this guy to say, hey, don't worry, your life's going to be better. If he's 48 years old, all his human capital, all of his skills are built into working for this tire factory, whatever it might be, whether it's somebody working in the plant or somebody doing maintenance on the machines or whatever it might be. That's where all his human capital is tied up. He's 48 years old. What is he going to do now? It's not like he can just go back and learn how to be a computer programmer or something like that necessarily. There's a steep learning curve for that. So I think ultimately we need to empathize with the plight of the people who are displaced initially. And I know a lot of people don't like this argument. I just read Richard Epstein had an argument today, and he was kind of against thinking about this kind of idea of maybe some kind of job training or adjustment pay or something like that. To a lot of classical liberals, this is like a horrible idea, something that they will never stand for. But it's not clear to me that we're ever going to make real practical progress unless we accept something along those lines, potentially, and maybe we'll try to design it better or something like that.
I'm so glad you said that, because that was actually going to be my next and final question. What, if anything, can we do to help workers who are displaced by trade? And I remember in the 2008 campaign, John McCain came out in support of trade adjustment assistance. And my understanding is some kind of program to that effect was put in place, but it was never very substantially funded, and it didn't end up doing much good. I'm not sure it even exists anymore. It's possible it doesn't. Personally, I have never been a very doctrinaire libertarian, and I've always been able to stomach certain forms of government assistance in places where I think it's warranted in the real world, especially when it's sort of, politically necessary. I mean, I guess you sort of anticipated my question and answered it before I even got a chance to ask it. Although I guess I would follow up by saying, is there anything else policy-wise that you might recommend in addition to the kind of job retraining you mentioned?
I think one thing libertarians could do is try to design a better one and maybe tie it to getting rid of other forms of relief and other forms of assistance. I mean, the fact of the matter is we have to realize we live in a second best world, a world where trade has been somewhat restricted, and there have been some favored industries that have got beneficial deals, say the sugar industry. That's a well-known one in America, that we still produce sugar in this country, even though it's not nearly close to being competitive with the market price because of the tariffs and stuff we have and import restrictions we have on sugar. But again, those workers who are in the sugar industry have put all of their skills in being a sugar worker. And if you've been doing that for 30 years and all of a sudden we say, okay, tomorrow we're going to get rid of all the tariffs on sugar. Well, the sugar industry probably won't survive very long in this country. Maybe you get a year out of it, maybe you get 2 years. That's not a lot of time for people to adjust and change their skills. So one thing we could do maybe is we can wind some of these things down slowly. Say, hey, in 10 years, we plan on all the sugar subsidies being gone. That'll preclude people from entering into that industry as people start leaving through attrition, retirements or whatever. People probably won't want to go work into it. It might slowly drag it down. They'll have to do cutbacks, and maybe that would be a little more gradual than, just breaking it off at one time. So that's one potential solution. The problem with that, though, is you run into the fact that it's not clear that a future Congress would honor the promises of a previous Congress. So there's a lot of public choice issues there with the future Congress saying, well, now it's getting close. We're going to keep those tariffs up where we said we were going to before, because, the sugar industry starts lobbying the whole idea of concentrated benefits and dispersed costs. So it's not clear how that would work. But that would be another thing I'd be for is sunsetting these provisions, winding them down, making it binding, and doing it slowly over time. That might limit the amount of trade adjustment, other forms of direct assistance we'd have to commit.
That's good. That's a good answer. I appreciate that. And of course, I appreciate you joining me this evening. I'm sure you're a pretty busy man, so thanks for sharing your time with me and all of my viewers. And by all means, I hope that we can have future conversations, because I like few things better than to pick the brains of those friends of mine who are even smarter than I am. So
I appreciate the compliment.
Oh yes, hey, you earned it. Believe you me. So thanks again, Adam.
Awesome. Well, thanks a lot, Akil. It was a good time talking with you. I appreciate it. Have a good one.
And liberty.
You bet, dude.
Take care.
Later.